Thank you, Ali, for being here. I just want to start by saying that I think what you've done in publishing your experience and sort of working as this whistleblower to the organization is like so brave and so vulnerable. I was just wondering whether there were any moments when you wanted to sort of quit what you were doing and how you overcame this.
Yeah, like probably all the time. So when I first began writing the book, I didn't have an agent. So I was kind of writing it thinking that nobody would read it. And I found that really reassuring because I thought, well, I'm just kind of doing it in the dark and that's fine. And I think that's how I managed to write something that was so honest, because I didn't have a reader in mind. I didn't think there would be readers. And then the first time I approached my agent, the first time I approached Matthew, who became my agent, after I sent off the query to him, that was my first kind of like, oh my God, what am I actually doing moment? And I was awake for most of the night. I just kind of lay in bed thinking this is a mistake. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to run away. And I think weirdly that was like the first and the biggest freak out. But there's been lots of times where I thought like, what am I doing? But as soon as you sign a contract, I think that kind of makes you sort of go, right, I've got to do this because I've been given a chunk of money that I will have to give back if I do run away. So that really kind of helped me keep going. I have a brilliant editor at Penguin, and she really helped as well. So I think that's one of the things that you have to remember when you're publishing a book that is quite like whistleblowy or that people might perceive as brave, is that you're not doing it in isolation. You obviously do the early stages alone, but the publishing of it happens with a team of people around you. And that's always going to be a team of people that really believe in the book, because a publisher isn't going to take a book on unless they think, this is a book that they really want to get behind. So I kind of felt really supported from early on. And that did really help with the nerves. In the lead up to publication, I was really nervous. So there was a big spread in the Sunday Times, and it was before that came out that I was really, really nervous. That was the beginning of July, and the book was out in the middle of July. So the beginning, like end of June, was quite a tense time. But again, you get to the stage where you can't turn back. So you've just got to do it. To manage the nerves, I walked lots and just kind of had loads of nervous energy sort of in me. But I think that helps as well when you're really busy promoting a book too.
No, of course. So then how important is it to you that people, and especially ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, sort of share their experiences and give out that sort of representation?
Oh, I think it really matters because there's so many different stories as well. And I was really conscious of that when I was writing the book, that this was my story, and the way that I experienced the organization might not be the same way that or definitely wouldn't be the same way that other people experienced it. So the more voices there are, the better. It also gives credibility to individuals, because although it is my story, one thing that completely amazed me when the book came out was that I was constantly being contacted by other witnesses saying, well, that's so strange because you've basically written my life down, or this part is so like something I experienced. So I think the more people who come forward, the more credibility it gives to stories as well, because it's not just something that the organization can dismiss as happening in isolation, or that, that it's just me imagining things or making something up. So yeah, I think there's strength in numbers for sure.
No, that's so interesting. And I mean, when I was reading the book, I thought your writing style was like so beautiful, and I was so captivated by it as well. Is that sort of something that came naturally to you? And did you have sort of a select aim when you started writing that led to this stylistic choice of sort of embedding the reader in the narrative of the narrator?
Yes. So I was very sure from really early on that it was the kind of story that the reader needed to be right there. And I didn't want to have the reflexive voice that is very often in memoir. I wanted that kind of immediacy, which is why it's first person present tense, and why it goes from when I'm 2 until I'm nearly 30, because I kind of wanted to take the reader through the journey of growing up like that, and then of losing faith, and then the consequences of everything after. So yeah, that was a choice from very early on. Whether or not it came naturally is a different question. I've always really enjoyed writing, and I did an MA in creative writing, which was invaluable, I think, because you get kind of the technical toolkit as a writer that you need to kind of be able to use. I think the voice was a lot of fun to develop the voice, and obviously it has to change as I get older. And stylistically, that was a challenge as well. I worked really hard to kind of make sure that I was hitting the right notes throughout, and that sometimes, I wasn't being too knowing when I was 6, but also I wasn't being too naive when I was 16 as well. So there was like a real balance to get right with that. But yeah, it felt really important. I think when you're telling a difficult story, it's important to kind of tell it in a way that does kind of draw the reader along, that you're not creating a barrier between the story and the reader as well. I wanted them, my editor always used to say to me, where is the reader? You need to have the reader right here. And so I'm really pleased that you felt that.
Yeah, no, of course. And again, I think death and sort of the Armageddon is such a focal point in the witnesses' belief and sort of like a central theme in your writing. I'm curious to ask what your attitude towards death is now.
Ooh, big question. Yeah, I think that was one of the very last things to kind of come to terms with, was my own mortality, because although I grew up terrified of death and pretty sure that God was going to punish me because I wasn't a very good child or a good teenager, I still sort of thought that I was going to live forever as well. So it's taken me quite a long time to realize that I will die and everybody will die. I had a lot of magical thinking around that for quite a while. Now I don't have any faith, so I don't know what happens after death, basically. But I continue to write about death. I think that's still one of the big themes in my work. So my next book is fiction, and it has quite a lot of death in it. It's another dark book. So yeah, I think that I write about things that I don't fully understand, or I don't quite know where I sit with it. So if I'm trying to work out a problem that I need to solve, then that becomes the theme in my work, and it becomes a sort of recurring preoccupation.
No, brilliant. And I think you talk as well about how it was your mother who brought you into sort of this world of the Jehovah's Witnesses, and you sort of continually reflect on the development of that relationship as well. I was wondering whether that sort of led you to harbor any anger or negative emotion towards her for putting you in that situation.
Yeah, I went through a phase before I wrote the book where I was very angry, and quite like a raw anger. It was a really destructive anger. I was very angry about being put in that situation. And I think I was angry at her for keeping herself in that situation as well, because I'd managed to see through it. I couldn't quite understand why she hadn't. But writing the book really reframed that relationship for sure. It reframed her choices. Before I wrote the book, I'd never seen her as a victim. I saw her as willingly joining the witnesses and going along with it. And as I wrote the book and was kind of forced to walk around, because when you write memoir, you've got to kind of walk around everybody in, you've got to treat everyone as a character, and you've got to work out their own motivations. So as I was kind of characterizing my mother, I realized that she'd been really deeply hurt before she became a witness, which led to her becoming a witness. But I also realized that, she was constantly being manipulated. And that realization really helped with the anger. And I feel that I'm not angry anymore. I'm quite often quite sad about the situation, but I definitely don't harbor anger towards her. So writing did help with that.
No, definitely. And I felt that when I was reading it. And it made me like very emotional at points. So you do it so well. I think one of the lines that particularly stuck with me was actually from the beginning, when you described her entering as God holding her within his teeth. I think that's like a really effective metaphor as well for sort of this almost predatory grasp that the patriarchy has within the organization. I mean, do you have any experiences at all with this?
Oh, absolutely. So I really wanted to make it quite clear from the beginning, and I'm really pleased that you picked up on that and that came across, that, my mum had awful taste in men. And basically, instead of going for another man, she went for this patriarchal organization that treated her just like a man would have treated her in the past. So she goes from being in this coercive relationship with my father to being in this coercive relationship with an organization. And when you grow up like that, I didn't realize, I didn't know words like patriarchy, I didn't know coercive control, I didn't know any of that. In fact, if I do remember encountering the word patriarch, and it was used as a positive way, was used to describe Abraham, and it was that this is something good and something that will keep you safe. So I didn't realize until after I left really what was happening, but I had these kind of quite knee-jerk reactions that I kept thinking something was wrong. But for a long time, I thought something was wrong with me because I wasn't kind of bowing to the patriarchal structure. I thought I was bad as a woman. Yeah, which I obviously try and draw out in the book and go into at later stages of being in this relationship, which almost the relationship that I get into acts as a metaphor for the way that the wider organization is working as well.
Yeah. So then, sort of given the patriarchal foundation and particularly like how it's present in a lot of holy texts, do you think that religion can ever align with feminism?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question too. I think it can present the air that it might, but I don't see that it ever actually could, because women are always back-footed immediately. You open the Bible and you get like a few pages in, and the woman is being blamed for the fact that she ate the fruit. So it's not a great way to start a story. I think that it can kind of try and free itself from its origins, but I don't think it's ever going to be something that can be wholly feminist. No.
No, I agree there completely. And as well, I think a big part of the culture of the Jehovah's Witnesses is of this control, as you said. So when you started to question the teachings and the organization, how did you rebel and like try and regain control of your life? And then how was that met by the wider community?
I think for a long time I didn't. So I detail in the book about being anorexic, and that was definitely my kind of safety mechanism. So that obviously is a lot about control, and that was me kind of channeling the control that I didn't have in my life into something else. And it became like a place to hide as well. So I could think about food, and I could think about calories and exercise and all these really destructive things, instead of having to think about God and having to think about the end. So it was kind of became, in a way, a replacement religion for me. When it came to me, and also what it did for quite a long time is it delayed me thinking, it delayed me actually questioning, because I was too preoccupied with it. I was too busy just kind of dying very slowly. But then when my first daughter, when she was born, that was really when I started to doubt. And I realized that I couldn't raise her like I'd been raised. I was met with a lot of resistance from the community then, though I didn't do anything overtly rebellious, but I started to change the way I dressed, started to read more, I started to be a bit more outspoken. And so I had a lot of times where I would be asked to talk to the elders' wives. The elders' wives would take me on the ministry and give me little helpful hints as to how I should behave or what I should be wearing or not wearing. And so any kind of attempt to take back control was met with huge resistance. But the resistance came in the form of counsel, and you're told that that's loving. So again, I thought it reinforced that there was something wrong with my behavior rather than that there was something wrong with the organization. I think I only really took back control after I left. And I think in many ways, writing the book was the kind of, right, here's my story, and I will tell it as I want to tell it. So that was probably the ultimate kind of taking back control.
Brilliant. And sort of staying around this theme of control, when I was reading, I definitely picked up on the, I mean, you call them cult tactics in your author's note, this isolation and the fear and sort of encouraging you like not to question, not to even like seek out the knowledge surrounding the faith. And this fine line between indoctrination and inculcation. So then do you think that the Jehovah's Witness is more similar to a cult than a religion?
Absolutely, yeah. I think I would personally describe them as a cult. Obviously, in my book, I had to be cautious so that I didn't get any lawsuits. I had a very robust legal read. But absolutely, they use cult tactics. And I would say that religion is the mask that they hide behind so that they can become exceptionally wealthy and raise money. It is their basically the thing that legitimizes them and gives them legal status. But I would say yes, they're a cult, and that's how they trap people, and that's how they keep people there. And the whole way that cults operate, you can map exactly onto how the witnesses work.
So then, in your opinion, is there a difference between a cult and a religion?
Yeah, I mean, the lines between the two are pretty blurry, but I would say that a religion that allows people to question, that allows people to have debate, that allows people to have different viewpoints, that allows people to decide what they want to wear, to go to university, to have freedom of information, um, wouldn't conform to a cult. But there are certainly a lot of religions that are very scared of outsiders, that do limit the knowledge of believers, that dictate basically every form of believers' lives. So I say a lot of religions do fall into the cult category, but not all of them as well. And I
No.
think it's important that we don't like, I've seen there's a kind of a tendency towards sort of calling lots of things cults that aren't necessarily cults. And I think that the problem that that does is that it makes it harder to identify things that actually are cults and people can't easily escape from as well.
That's such an interesting point, actually. So then, in an ideal world, do you think, like for you, would there be no Jehovah's Witnesses, and would sort of an abolishment be justifiable in that case?
Yeah, again, I think that's really difficult. I think there should be a very robust investigation into their finances and where the money's going and what they're doing with the money. I think that investigations have up until now been too ready to accept what official spokespersons for the organization have said, and have been too kind of willing to be quite naive and believe what's being told to them as well. So I think there needs to be a harder line taken when people are investigating them. At the same time, I think if they were to suddenly disappear or if they were made illegal, say if they got their charitable status taken away, I think they would go underground. And I think that that's also a problem because members would still have um, the all of the manipulation tactics would still be there and would still work. So I think that that's a risk. And also because for so long they've spoken about the end of days coming and that that comes with persecution. So that if they had their status removed, they could spin that as persecution. So it's a really difficult one to think, well, what should happen? Um, and again, I think that's why it's really important that people do speak out, because the more people who do that, hopefully the more people who are still in will be able to see through it. So I hope there's kind of more of a slow drip demise. But I would also definitely say that I think there needs to be proper investigations done into them.
No, brilliant. This is the last one from me before I hand you over. So, what to you is the key message that you want readers to take away from the book?
Oh, so yeah, I think that it's possible to leave things. It can seem so difficult to change your life, and it can seem so terrifying when you're stuck in something. It can be so easy to think that there's no alternatives, that there's no life beyond the life that you have. And it can seem absolutely terrifying. And I was terrified. And it took a long time to not be scared, but it is possible. It is possible to free yourself from a bad childhood, free yourself from an abusive situation or a bad relationship. It's absolutely possible. And although it's scary, it's always better on the other side. And I would always say, anyone who isn't sure if they should leave something or not, I'd say it probably means you do need to leave.
No, that's an amazing answer. Thank you so much. And
Thank
I'll
you.
hand you over now.
Thank you.
Hi,
Hi.
I am Keisha. I am actually a former Jehovah's Witness myself. So I have not had the privilege of reading your book yet. I'm in the US and it's not as accessible here, but I did have some questions too. And I wanted to circle back. You talked about being nervous and about publishing the book, but then also the need to spread awareness. But I wanted to pinpoint, was there like a straw that broke the camel's back or something that truly prompted you to where you were like, I have to write a book, I have to do this?
Yeah, it's really, really hard now looking back to pinpoint that point, but there definitely was. So after I left, I went to uni and I did an MA in creative writing, and I wrote 2 fiction manuscripts that didn't get picked up. They were completely unsuccessful, and I realized that I was basically not telling anybody about where I'd come from. I was really ashamed of who I'd been. I am a really liberal person, and so many of the beliefs that I had just seemed completely abhorrent to me, that I'd used to be a witness and believe these things. So I didn't tell anybody, like none of my friends, nobody knew. And I thought, if I am wanting to write about faith, or if I want to write about cults or these things, people are going to say to me, where are you, like, where's that interest come from? And I'm going to never be able to be honest. So I thought, right, I just need to get it out, just like ripping a plaster off. So I wrote it down. And I think that that was kind of what motivated it, was like, going forward, I need to get this out so that I can actually write other things.
Oh yeah, so you can actually break through and move forward. That makes perfect sense to me. Was there like a fallout from the people who did know you when it was published, or people who knew you from the truth? Did they come back and say anything?
Um, Not directly to me. I did have a few messages from people saying, why are you attacking those nice people? Why are you being bad to them? And I was saying,
Right.
well, I'm not. It's about the organization. It's not about individuals. People who knew me now, everyone has been so supportive and really lovely when they discovered kind of where I came from. And I found this, again, so much compassion outside of the witnesses, even though you're told that there is none,
Right.
which has been really reassuring. But I've had some insane comments under like YouTube videos I've done and things. So there was a few people saying that, like, that I was like Satan's mouthpiece and all this kind of thing, but nothing too bad. I think I expected worse fallout than I've actually had.
Yeah, I understand. And it's interesting to me. I find, because I run an XJW Instagram account, that the people who have the worst comments are ones who didn't truly try to follow the rules 100%, like some of us did back then. So it's always interesting to see who comes out the woodwork. But I know, again, because I haven't read the book yet, could you tell me a little bit about what the family dynamic was growing up, and then maybe how your relationship is now?
Yeah, so growing up, it was me and my mother and my sister. My sister is 6 years older than me, and she was a single mom. So we were very close as well. And then my sister left home when I was about 12. So I kind of was a bit like I was an only child for a bit as well. But then when my mother, basically after I left, I tried to just fade. I tried to keep it from her because I didn't want her to completely cut me off. And then I'm just trying to think. Yeah, then I started to blog a little bit, and she discovered that I'd said something anti-witness online, and that was when she shunned me. And I've not seen her for 7 years.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah.
So you're not officially disfellowshipped or shunned from the organization, but she's doing her own shunning because of
Yeah.
what? Okay.
Yeah, she did her own shunning, and I think it was at one assembly, there was a video about being loyal to Jehovah, and if your children have left, that's it, you just cut them off, even though I haven't, to my knowledge, been disfellowshipped. Though maybe now, who knows what they've said in private, but yeah.
Right. Yep. I do recall that because I was still attending during that time. So when you were a Jehovah's Witness, because it was mentioned earlier about Armageddon, was dying in Armageddon, was that like your biggest fear that was keeping you in the organization for a while, or were there other things that
That was the
kept you
second
there?
biggest. And to be honest, I thought it was right for quite a long time. I believed it. I truly do still think I did believe it because I've been taught it was true since I was 2 years old. I wasn't like, I was a really good witness. For quite a long time, I wasn't a good teenager, and then I went quite good witness. What was keeping me in was the thought of losing my mum. Once I started to doubt, I couldn't leave because I just thought I couldn't handle that. And also because I'd been a good witness, it wasn't just losing my mom, it was losing everything.
Right.
I just thought like literally I started again from knowing nobody. I had no friends. I hadn't made friends with people at work. I hadn't made friends with people at uni. I had done everything I was meant to do. And I didn't know how on earth to make a life outside. And also, I was terrified of worldly people. I really thought they were really terrible people. So I was really scared to enter the world. But ultimately, I couldn't leave because I couldn't stay because I realized that there was no love. And that was what really broke the whole thing was I thought it can't be God's organization because they're not very nice people. And that was it.
Yeah, it's what's interesting, right? Because when you make your first friendship outside the organization and they're nothing like the people within it, it's shocking because you realize the people that you were surrounded by were your friends because you were at the congregation. But these are people who genuinely like you for you and want to enjoy your company, not just because you're exemplary sister or brother. And you're like, oh, you like me. Like, it's a whole different feeling. It's amazing.
Yeah.
So, but making friends, what was the hardest part of acclimating to the world then? That
Well, because I'm quite, I don't know, I'm maybe quite contrary person. I'm not sure. So basically, you're told that the worst people, the very worst people you could meet when you leave are anyone in the arts or musicians, music. That's just totally from Satan. I've always loved music. So when I left, I thought, right, I'm going to go and find the very worst people that they've warned me against, and I'm going to see how bad those people are. So I got a job in music and was surrounded by musicians and DJs and discovered that like these were lovely people.
oh yeah,
These were not what I'd been told. These were people who were supportive, people who had dreams and ambitions and wanted to change the world. And I was like, what? And like you say, the contrast, I suddenly realized that the congregation was like Mean Girls. And it was
exactly.
like this, like everyone talking about you and gossiping about you and just being so basically really small-minded and not very nice. And then you leave and it's just great. And I made friends. I had about a year where I didn't really know anybody, but I made friends pretty quickly. And I'm really grateful for that because I think if I'd been isolated for much longer, that would have been really hard. But I basically, threw myself into culture and art and discovered that that was the thing that would save me more than any belief system ever would.
Yeah, I agree. And I've met some amazing people. And you're right too. They also are about community. You're a part of an organization where you thought you were doing good and you're knocking on doors to bring people into the truth. But when you're out and you're dealing with people in the arts and they're actually doing volunteering and giving blood and things that you couldn't do, and you see them genuinely helping, and then to do it and feel that, it's unmatched. So along those lines, I guess, what would you say to others who are still Jehovah's Witnesses but doubting it, or those who could be considering joining, about your experience and the difference, the contrast? I know we talked a little bit about it, but specifically to that audience, what would you say?
Yeah, I'd say there's no real love within the organization. What you are told is love isn't love. It's conditional. It's all conditional on you believing the same thing. and being part of this community. And I would say if you're thinking of leaving, jump. Just really just leave and do not turn around, don't look back, just go. And if you're thinking of joining, please, please don't. There are much, much better ways of finding happiness and finding security and finding belonging. I know that witnesses offer this idea of belonging, and for a lot of people, they feel that that works, but there are better things to belong to. And they're out there. Just look a little bit harder or for a little bit longer.
I love it. One last question, and we'll let some people ask you some questions as well. But what is your greatest joy or accomplishment now that you're no longer a Jehovah's Witness and allowed to feel some pride and joy about other things?
Well, oh God, I get so much joy every day. I mean, I have 4 kids and they're all a complete riot, and I love that they can be themselves. I absolutely love it, because I remember, and you'll remember, Sunday mornings at the meeting, having to behave, being so scared that you were going to do something wrong, and they can do things wrongly and they're not scared, they can just be themselves. And I get so much joy from that. I also get loads of joy from my work. I love being a writer. I absolutely love it. And I love it because I got to choose that, and I've had to work really hard to get here. And sometimes I kind of think, God, in just over a decade, I have built a whole life, and I get loads of joy from that because it's mine and I made it. And yeah, there's a certain amount of satisfaction in that. I think it's not a life that I fell into by mistake. It's one that I made.
I love it. I appreciate all your answers, and I can't wait for my book to get here so I can read about it.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you so much. It's been a really incredible discussion already. So honored to have you here talking about your story so far. Just before we get some more questions in for the Q&A, please do send them to either myself or Keisha or Heather. I just quickly like to ask that the other day, funnily enough, some Jehovah's Witnesses came and knocked on my student accommodation door. And I think often people never know quite what to say or whether they should say anything. And I'd just like to know, what would you say if a Jehovah's Witness came and knocked on your door? And what do you think people should say in this conversation to them?
Well, to be honest, I still don't. That is like my final frontier. I still don't know what to say to them. They came to my door a few years just before COVID, and I just ran away. I didn't know what to do, so I just sort of said, "Oh no, thank you," and ran away. So I'm probably not the best person to ask about that. I would say probably don't engage, actually, because there's always the risk that they might try and convert you, or that you might be having a vulnerable day. Probably best just to avoid them, I think.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, I understand that's yeah, I can understand that for sure. So yeah, just to kick off the Q&A then, a question from the chat. Is there something in the novel that you found particularly difficult to share?
Probably some of the most difficult stuff actually got taken out. So I had a very lengthy legal read done. I think there was eventually 3 legal reads on the book. So the most difficult stuff was taken out. I think what I wanted to do, I didn't find it especially difficult, but it's probably related, was that I wanted to make myself human as well. And I think there's a tendency in memoir for a lot of memoir writers that the narrator, that is the person obviously who's written the book, is always presented a little bit better than everybody else in the book. And I wanted to kind of be really human and unculpable and sort of complicit in my own demise as well. So I really made sure that I kind of was quite a rounded out narrator, which was difficult to do, but it felt like an important thing. So I had to kind of get to that level of self-interrogation.
Okay, we've got another one in the chat here. You said you currently aren't religious. Was there any part of the Jehovah's Witness that did bring you comfort?
No, not latterly. I mean, it was very appealing to when I was really little, to feel that I had answers to things and that there was a certainty and that I knew what was going to happen in the future. But looking back, I also see how damaging that was, and that I was a little bit of a self-righteous, opinionated brat, basically, for quite a long time. And so what can sometimes appear to be comforting can also be really damaging.
Thank you. So another question from the chat, excuse me. Another question from the chat is, at what point did you decide to leave, and what was the breaking point?
So there wasn't like one huge breaking point, and this is detailed in the book, but it was definitely an accumulation of things. So when I had my first daughter, I looked down at her, and there's a book that you're given when you're a witness child called My Book of Bible Stories, full of quite graphically illustrated Bible stories. And that had given me nightmares when I was little, and I was given that by a family friend when my daughter was born. And I opened it and I thought, you know what, I can't do this. I can't read it to her. And I knew right then that I would have to leave. And it took me another 2 years before I could do it. But that was definitely the biggest turning point, when I knew that I couldn't pass it on. She wasn't going to inherit the same childhood as mine.
Yeah, those were very vivid images in that book.
Terrible images, yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Another private question is, how did you cope with the pain and the sadness, and how do you cope now of not having a close relationship with your mother, especially during significant life events and the holidays and celebrations?
It's really difficult. I don't have an easy answer for that one. I wish I did. I think one of the ways that I cope is because I write, and because I'm making art. And I think that that's how I cope with it. I kind of, like I said earlier, when I need to work something out, I write about it. So all of my work in some way relates to mothers. And I've realized that I'm just started my third book, and I'm like, oh, same thing. I'm writing the same thing again. And I think until I get a different answer to that problem, I will keep doing it. So I don't always cope particularly well. The weirdest thing is when the book got sold, I was desperate to phone my mom, because I was like, oh, I've got a book that's going to be released by Penguin. And I keep getting, every time something really exciting happens, I realize that I still want to phone my mom. So I think it's kind of a life's work to learn to live without someone.
No, of course. So then similarly, do you still have friends in the organization? And if so, have you tried to persuade them to leave?
No, I don't have contact with anyone who is a current witness. The really lovely thing is, once the book came out, I was contacted by quite a few people who I didn't know had left, that I had been friends with, and lost touch with. And so that was really nice, kind of, that it's rekindled friendships as well, which has been quite a special thing, actually. Yeah.
The next question is actually more toward policy about Jehovah's Witnesses. And the question is, why do Jehovah's Witnesses refuse certain medical treatments, such as blood transfusions, even when it may cost them their life?
So it's based on a really archaic scripture. It's based on a scripture in Leviticus that says that you must not eat the blood of any flesh, and they equate blood transfusions to eating blood. But what I recently discovered when I was researching the book is that very, very deep in their website is a disclaimer that says that basically any advice in their publications does not constitute medical advice, and that if anybody dies as a result of it, you cannot sue the organization. Which makes me think that the reason that they have these kind of policies is another way of control. It's another way of saying that we're different from the world, we have this belief. It's also another way of, and I do believe that they do this, of creating martyrs, so that there are people who they can hold up as examples. There's a brochure that features teenagers who died by refusing blood transfusions, that is given to teenage members of the organization. And again, it is used as, these are the kind of people you want to be like. they sacrificed their life for God, and what have you done, basically? So it is a very clever control mechanism.
I agree. Yeah. Just if I can add to the questioner, just one fun fact as well. They also don't allow you to have any portion of blood. So even like if you want whole white blood cells, you cannot. However, they do encourage breastfeeding, and in breast milk there is white blood cells, but they don't explain that either. So
Yeah.
Thank you. Another question about the eating disorder part of your memoir. Were there particular practices or teachings or behaviors within the Jehovah's Witness community that exacerbated or caused the eating disorder to come along?
I don't know if there was, but I do know that it is quite common. There's quite a lot of people who have said that they've had eating disorders. I think maybe the excessive focus on the body, particularly on the female body, that I never felt like I owned my body ever. I was told that I had dedicated myself to Jehovah, therefore my body was his, and then my body became my husband's. My body was never mine, and women are never allowed to decide very much at all. And so actually, I would say that the whole patriarchal culture is a complete breeding ground for eating disorders, because you are just going to kind of reclaim what you can. And weirdly, there's also massive focus on what you look like the whole time, because you have to dress properly, you have to be modest, you have to have your hair properly, you have to be neat, you have to be tidy, you have to be all these things. So you're constantly scrutinizing yourself as well. So yeah, I think probably the whole culture is actually so toxic that it, yeah, probably leads to things, unhealthy behaviors, let's say.
Okay, that's really interesting. I think the next question is quite a personal one. And it says, it seems that what you're experiencing mirrors what happens even in non-religious groups that are cliquey and scared to look outside of their comfort zone and are more of an echo chamber. This person has had to start over when they've been divorced and suffered from psychosis. They describe it as being like being thrown in a cold bath and realizing there's so much more out there, but it's really hard to rebuild in your mid-30s and find meaningful connections when you feel independent. Could you offer any advice on that?
Yeah, it is. It's really, really hard. And I think the cold bath analogy is a pretty good one. I would say try and volunteer. I volunteered quite a lot. Try and maybe change your job. Try and think of ways of finding a new support network. I don't have an easy answer because it is exceptionally hard, and it takes a lot to kind of rebuild. But try and put out feelers and try and talk to people when you can. But yeah, it's really hard.
thank you. Another one, will Jehovah's Witnesses be able to read the book?
There's been a lot of warnings recently in the literature about not reading apostate books or things published by ex-witnesses. So I think they're probably being warned not to, but I know that a lot of witnesses are, because I've had messages from them. I've had messages from people who've left because they've read the book. I've also had messages from people saying that they read my book on their Kindle or on their device during the meetings, which I obviously thought was hilarious, that they kind of smuggled it into the Kingdom Hall. So they won't be able to read the book, but I think that's the great thing now, that there's so many different ways of reading books. Someone even had sent me a picture of the book with a different jacket on, and they disguised it so they could have it in their house. So yeah, where there's a will,
There's a way.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Another question: what do you think are the differences in the experiences of men and women within the community?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because obviously I'm looking at it from a female perspective and from being so tightly controlled. And obviously for men, it's different, but I think it would be a horrible environment to grow up in as a man because it's so toxic and it's so, it's a prime example of toxic masculinity. And if you don't fit the mold, you're excluded regardless of if you're male or if you're female. So I think it would be really hard for men. And I think it would be a very difficult environment to shake when you leave as well, because a lot of men are told that they're right from really early on. And so they have a particular way of speaking to women and interacting with women. And I think that that would be really, really hard to overcome on the other side. So I don't think I had it any worse than the men in the organization. I think they just had it differently. It's just a different encounter.
I guess touching on that, we've got another one in the chat that says, after you left, did you face any difficulty in adjusting to life outside the organization?
Yes. I found it quite strange because I suddenly had so much time. So that's another way that they kind of control your whole existence, is because you're so busy. I had like 3 meetings a week. I went on the ministry, I did Bible study, I prayed, I was just, my whole life revolved around being a witness. And when I left, I suddenly had just like time, Sunday mornings, and I realized that I didn't have a clue what I liked doing. Like I literally didn't have an idea what to do with my time or what I liked doing with my time. And that was a really weird thing to discover. It was kind of like I was nearly 30 and suddenly I had to find out who I was and what I liked doing outside of Bible things. And I didn't have a clue. Sunday mornings I used to walk to buy a cup of coffee, takeaway coffee, and then go to the cinema and see what was on. And that was amazing, just the freedom. Because again, like going to the cinema was fraught with difficulty because you had to go and see something that didn't have sex, it didn't have swearing, that didn't have violence, and so really you couldn't see very much. And suddenly I just had like the whole world was completely open. So I think, although it seemed a bit scary and there was a very dark year that was really, really hard, I was very depressed and anxious as well. But at the same time, I could feel life opening up and I could feel this kind of sense of adventure that suddenly I could do all these things. I could do anything I wanted, which was an amazing feeling.
Yes, I love it. I think one thing about being a Jehovah's Witness is that they put this purpose in front of you. So you feel like you're working toward a purpose. So when you do leave the organization, you're like, well, wait, that goal is gone. But now, as you mentioned, you have all this time back to do what you truly want. And the next question is, what are you doing next? Is another book? What will it be about? Where are we going? Where will we see you next?
Yeah, so my next book is a debut novel and it publishes next January or February. So I've just handed in final edits to that. And it will be, it's completely different. Although it's still kind of about control and manipulation, but it's completely fiction. It's nothing to do with me or my life, which I completely love. I'm really excited about it. So that's next. And I'm also working on another nonfiction, which kind of picked up with me 10 years after I leave. So yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, so you've moved on past that blockage. Now you've got the book out.
Exactly.
Okay, I think last question now is, assuming your family has read the book, have you found your extended family accepting of your new life, or has there been sort of more of a kickback over your description of events?
No, everyone's been lovely. It was only my mother and my sister in my family who were witnesses, and my family outside of the witnesses have been really supportive, which has been really nice. I don't know if my mother's read the book. Obviously, she'll be warned against it, but I don't know if her curiosity will have got better for her. So I don't know anything about that. But I have certainly felt really supported, which has been really nice.
Okay, thank you so much. That brings our Q&A to an end and the event. Thank you so much, Ali Millar, an incredible talk and such inspirational words. I'm sure people can take away so much from what you've said. It was an honor to have you at our event. Thank you also so much to our two guest interviewers, Heather, Keisha. It was really amazing interview, and thank you so much for applying. And for anyone else here who is listening and wants to apply for any upcoming events, you can find that information on our social media, and please do apply. It's an amazing opportunity to talk to and ask questions of some really interesting and well-written guests. And talking about that, we have some events coming up. If you haven't seen our social media, we have an event on Tuesday at 7 p.m. with Professor Emma Smith, who has written a best-selling book on Shakespeare. He's coming along for that. And we also have another talk at the end of February with Brian Wong, who is a Time and Financial Times commentator. So please do sign up to interview or come along to listen. And also we'll be uploading on social media all the talks, and look out for that and share and like and subscribe and all of those things. So thank you so much once again, Ali Millar. I hope everyone enjoyed the talk. Please do fill in the form, give your feedback, and yeah, have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, you too.